They were destroyed 100 years ago. Every record said they were dead. But when a ship with no ID appeared in orbit above the Imperial capital, the first thing it transmitted was a voice from the past. They didn't ask to talk. They simply said, "We remember." The Empire expected a fleet. They got one man in armor. He didn't carry a flag. He carried memory. This wasn't revenge. It was the return of everything they tried to erase. And when the galaxy saw the truth buried for centuries, it wasn't a war that started. It was a flash fire of remembrance. The Empire tried to kill guilt itself. But guilt can be turned into a weapon, and humanity into a final reminder. Stay with us to find out how this story ends, and don't forget to subscribe. Admiral Vors stood at the center of Imperial Fleet Command's bridge, motionless as the tactical map shimmered above the command table. No one spoke. Not really. Officers whispered in hushed, fractured tones, as though loud speech might trigger something, some awakening, some response from the thing approaching them across the void. Distance? Vors' voice was steady, but taut like a stretched cable. 62,000 clicks from central perimeter, replied the sensor officer, antenna twitching involuntarily. Closing fast. Sir, it's not decelerating. Vors turned slowly toward the technician. You mean it's approaching at interstellar velocity and hasn't begun braking? No braking, no communication, no signature, no origin marker. It just appeared. Vors' mouth went dry. That wasn't supposed to be possible. Every known ship in the galaxy was tagged with an encoded signature from launch. It was Empire law. Even pirates spoofed their IDs. Even smugglers mimicked faction markers. But this wasn't spoofing. It was nothing. A blank, a shadow, something the stars seemed to bend around, unwilling to speak its name. Visual, Vors ordered. The main screen blinked. Silence. Then, a ship. Not large, not flashy, but wrong. Sleek in the way a scalpel was sleek. Matte black hull, a texture so dark it hurt to look at. Not in color, in presence. It glided, carving through subspace like space itself recoiled from touching it. Human, someone whispered. The word hit the room like a concussion wave. Terran. The ghosts of Orion. The race burned from history, vanished after the Jara conflict. The race the Empire had officially wiped out. 100 years ago. Gone. Dead. Extinct. And now this. Vors' throat worked. Communications? The comms officer swallowed visibly. No response on open or encrypted frequencies. But he hesitated. But what? It's transmitting. Not an Imperial standard. It's using Terran standard. The air thickened. Translate. A pause. Then a mechanical voice filled the bridge, flat and synthetic. You erased us. You silenced our children. Now we remember. Now we return. It wasn't a threat. It was a verdict. Vors felt the chill creep up his spine. Scramble defense squadrons. Activate planetary shields. Alert the High Council. Before the orders could fully register, another voice cut through their systems, unauthorized, unstoppable. This one was angry. This is the SV Vengeance. No further warnings. Stand down. Or be dismantled. The transmission ended. Panic took root. They're accelerating, the sensor officer croaked. Sir, it's speeding up. That was impossible. No ship should be able to accelerate toward a gravity well at those speeds without breaking apart. But the SV Vengeance didn't care about physics. It wasn't playing by the rules. One of the junior analysts shrieked. It just bypassed our perimeter cannons. They didn't fire. What? The AI systems, they won't target it. They say the ship doesn't exist. It's not recognized as a valid object. They can't lock on because they can't see it. On screen, the black silhouette of the Terran ship jumped again. Closer. Closer. One jump away from Corvallis Prime. The Empire's capital. Vors leaned over the console, hands trembling. They're back, he whispered. The Terran are back. Alarms wailed across Corvallis Prime's orbital defense ring. 1,000 sirens echoed through stone and steel, announcing the one thing the Empire had never prepared for. A ghost returned. Inside the High Council's panic chamber, Chancellor Mayo struck the armrest of her throne with a clenched fist. One Terran ship, she growled. And you're telling me it bypassed 5 fleets, 3 defense rings, and the entire outer perimeter in 2 hours? General Talek, metals jingling against his jacket, bowed stiffly. Chancellor, our AI systems won't engage. They won't even mark it as hostile. It's like it's not there. But it's very clearly here, she snapped. There was no response. What could anyone say? The Empire, eternal, unchallenged, absolute, was facing an enemy it couldn't even detect properly. An aide stepped forward, pale and shaking. There's more. We just received a signal from the deep archive vault. May blinked. Those systems aren't networked. They're not. But this one activated when the Terran ship entered system range. She stared at him. What did it say? He hesitated. It's a voice message. A human one. From a Captain Roar. The chamber froze. That name hadn't been spoken aloud in decades. A war criminal, in the Empire's records. A human naval commander. The butcher of Vire Station. The ghost of Jara. Dead. Or so they thought. Play it, Mayo said. The room filled with static. Then a deep, slow voice. To the Empire. You taught us mercy was weakness. You taught us silence meant safety. You burned our skies. Buried our cities. We are what you made us. A pause. This message is for the one who pressed the button. Chancellor Mayo. We remember your face. Every eye turned to her. Her hands curled in her lap. Just slightly. She had been young then. A junior officer. A political climber. She had signed the order for the final radiance bomb over Earth's upper hemisphere. Told herself it was justified. I was following orders, she murmured. General Talek's voice was flat. He doesn't care. Suddenly, all system lights blinked red. Another voice, this one mechanical, emotionless, cut through every channel. Core defense grid compromised. Sector 0 breached. Unauthorized landing detected. Talek spun. What landed? An officer burst in. Chancellor, it's on the planet. The Terran ship deployed. Something. A pod. Small. It burned through the atmosphere like it didn't care. No alarms triggered. No targeting response. Where is it now? The aide swallowed. Upper spire deck. Inside the palace. It's walking. Walking. It's not organic, Chancellor. It's a machine. Or a suit. Something. Old. But it's moving. And it's cutting through the guard. Security footage blinked into life. A corridor. Then static. Another view. A blur. Then resolution. A black figure, nearly 9 feet tall. Jagged armor. Scarred plating. It moved with brutal, inhuman precision. On its chest, 2 faint letters glowed. SV. Mayu whispered it aloud. Vengeance. The figure paused, turned to the nearest security cam, and spoke. Chancellor Mayu. You buried my family. I came to return the favor. Then silence. The red emergency lights throbbed in rhythm with the approaching terror. Every pulse revealed more carnage. Vors had once believed in the infallibility of the Empire. Its fleets. Its systems. But now, as the Terran machine moved through the most secure facility in the known galaxy, unopposed, he realized something much worse than defeat had come. Judgment. The corridors of the Imperial Palace were soaked in blood and silence. Where once had echoed the footsteps of the honor guard, now came only the mechanical rhythm of armored boots against obsidian floors. Every door that closed was opened again. Every barricade, broken. The creature did not run. It did not hurry. It simply walked forward. The SV unit moved with precise brutality. It ignored weapons fire, shrugged off impact rounds, sliced through energy fields. It advanced through plasma. It burned through blast doors. It dismembered the finest soldiers in the Empire with industrial indifference. And always, always, the voice came after. We remember. General Talek stood frozen in the security command hub, watching a screen blink out with every meter the unit crossed. They're not here for conquest, he whispered. They're here for her. Chancellor May backed away from the center table, her hands trembling now. Evacuate me. Talek didn't move. You heard me, she hissed. He didn't answer. Because part of him knew there was nowhere to run. In orbit, Admiral Vors watched the skies light up. The SV Vengeance still hovered like a nightmare made real. It hadn't moved since its pod dropped. Hadn't attacked. Hadn't spoken again. It was simply present. His officers were paralyzed. Weapons refused to lock. AI wouldn't target. Every command ended in recursion failure. Error. Object not found. Error. Perception loop detected. Error. Subject null permanent. Sir, his second-in-command whispered, This thing isn't a ship. It's a message. In the palace, they finally sent in the elite. The Black Mantle. Clone tacticians. Accelerated reaction implants. Neural combat link-ups. They surrounded the SV unit on the upper deck. They fired first. That was their only mistake. The SV tore through them like a harvest blade. It did not roar. It did not taunt. It simply deleted them from space. And then it kept walking. Chancellor May's escape pod began launch sequence. But before it could lift, a shadow landed on it with such force that the entire pad folded inward. The pod hissed, then cracked, then opened. May screamed. And the figure stepped through the misted light of the crushed escape door. 9 feet of black metal and rage-born silence. The voice came again. You killed 4.6 billion people. You said it was order. We've come to remind you what justice sounds like. She stumbled back, scrambling for a weapon, but her sidearm locked out. The SV unit stood before her, raised one arm, and projected a memory. A city. Her strike. The wave of white light. The silence after. The children. She saw herself. Young. Cold. Certain. The broadcast ended. The visor opened. Inside was a scarred face. Human. Older than it should have been. Eyes that burned from underneath. Not a ghost. A survivor. I was on the surface, he said. I watched you speak on the broadcasts. I watched the justifications. She tried to plead. I didn't. You did, he cut her off. And the Empire applauded. You taught the stars that extermination was policy, that annihilation had protocol. He raised his hand. The SV armor's arm lit up, not a weapon, but a pulse beacon. Maeve screamed. He didn't touch her. The pulse activated, and every terminal in the palace came alive. The records came back. The Empire's deleted logs. The Blackside orders. The Earth campaign in full color. Not rewritten. Not framed. Shown. To everyone. Every civilian. Every system. Every broadcast. Every silence cracked open. Maeve collapsed as her words from decades ago played in loop behind her. This is a necessary measure. Earth represents instability. Removal is the kindest option. The man stood over her. Do you know what kindness looks like now? He walked past her. She wept. But he didn't kill her. That would have been mercy. And mercy was for the dead. He left her to exist inside the history she had tried to erase. Admiral Vors saw it all from orbit. Every screen across the system now blared with truth. The Empire's clean legacy was now bloodstained and public. He sank into his chair. This is how they fight, he whispered. His aide turned to him. Who? Vors' voice was low. The Terrans. They don't kill nations. They bury lies. Across the galaxy, systems long under Imperial shadow paused. And remembered. Old whispers. Old silences. Then, the rebel systems lit up. One after another. They weren't coordinated. But they didn't need to be. Because truth is a kind of gravity. It pulls others with it. Back on the SV Vengeance, the man removed his armor. Scars lined his spine. His neural jack pulsed faintly. He sat in silence. Then activated a private channel. Elara, he said softly. The screen blinked. A woman's face appeared, older, tired, wearing a Terran fleet uniform. Status, she asked. Phase 1 complete. Mayu. Broken. Alive. Collateral. Only those who stood between us and memory. She didn't smile. But she nodded. Then you've made contact. He looked out the viewport at the burning horizon of Corvallis Prime. They remember us now. He leaned forward. But more importantly, his voice was steel. They know we remember them. In the days following the Corvallis broadcast, the stars grew loud. Not from weapons fire. From voices. From colonies repeating fragments of the transmission. From silenced peoples quoting records once considered myth. From imperial prefects being overthrown, not by armies, but by memory returning like a storm. The Empire's glorious lie had cracked. And the cracks were spreading. But the response was not shock and awe. It was silence. Operation Chrysalis began in shadow. Not public denial. Quiet erasure. Data clusters containing the Corvallis archive began failing. One by one. Not in a way that raised alarms. A delay here. A checksum error there. Then the loss of redundant backups. The SV Vengeance caught it first. Elara stood in the dim command chamber, staring at the cascade across her holomap. They're not countering the message, she said. They're trying to let it die naturally. We're nodded slowly. History rewritten through neglect. He paced. It's what they've always done. A decade from now, they'll say the records were fake. Fabricated by dissidents. And without proof, people will believe it. Elara tilted her head. Then we don't protect the message. We replicate it. Phoenix cells activated. Spread across fringe systems, independent of each other, seeded with dormant memory cores. Each one now came alive. Broadcasting fragments. Interweaving the full story into art, into code, into music, into children's games and public rituals. It wasn't just resistance. It was cultural recursion. Even if someone forgot what the Empire did, they would remember the song. Even if someone deleted the file, they would see the symbol carved into a wall. Increment. The Phoenix was no longer a faction. It was a pattern. But the Empire wasn't passive. The High Council issued no public statements. Instead, patter-kill units were deployed. Special teams trained not in combat, but in idea suppression. They tracked memetic spread, intercepted shared imagery, arrested poets. They began to destroy the very form of expression. Not treason, but narrative dissidence. On Arvos 3, an ancient colony once subjugated in the early days of expansion, the first open-fire exchange erupted. A Phoenix cell had embedded the Corvallis truth into a planetary monument sound architecture. It played every day at noon. The Empire detonated the site during peak hour. 3,000 civilians dead. When Roar received the footage, he didn't rage. He didn't pace. He sat down and recorded a message. It wasn't encrypted. It wasn't protected. It was meant to be taken. You burn stones because you cannot kill songs. You kill civilians because you cannot face soldiers. You erase facts because you cannot face truth. You call us ghosts. But ghosts don't build. We are alive. And we are coming. It went viral before the Empire's censors even knew it existed. And once again, silence was shattered. The SV Vengeance became a node. It no longer needed to fight. It became a lens. Wherever it went, people spoke. It arrived in orbit, and entire cities painted their walls black. It docked, and families came to the airlock carrying photos of ancestors, asking if they'd survived. It hovered, and the Empire trembled, not from its weapons, but from what its presence forced people to remember. The ship was alive with memory, and memory became movement. The Empire did what it always did when overwhelmed. They tried to divide. A splinter broadcast appeared, claiming that the Terrans were a faction, not a species, that the Vengeance crew were extremists, that the Earth survivors had descended into madness, that they wanted war, not justice. But it was too late, because by then, other species had joined. Not in armies. In remembrance. The Vescarii, long enslaved in Empire's deep-mind systems, began broadcasting their own erased histories in Phoenix format. The Drelva opened their ancient vaults containing footage from the Terran cleansing. Once bartered as a trophy, the Anari, blind and song-based, began singing new frequencies into the archive. Not rebellion. Witnessing. The Empire ordered a blackout. Full sector lockdowns. Information curfews. It worked, briefly, but it also revealed their fear. And fear, as always, is contagious. When the people saw the lengths their rulers were willing to go to prevent a memory, they began to ask, what else did they erase? The answer echoed from 1,000 silent graves. Roar watched it all unfold. Not from a throne. From a worn seat aboard a haunted ship. The Vengeance had once carried 30 officers. Now it carried 9. The rest had died over decades of preparation. All for this. He looked at Alara. Still think we're not strong enough to win this? She shook her head. We already did. Then why does it feel like it's just beginning? She smiled bitterly. Because remembering was just step 1. Roar nodded. And now, we teach them what remembrance costs. The Empire changed its strategy. No more denials. No more assassinations. They began to build. Not weapons. Not fleets. Narrative frameworks. Entire sectors were restructured, socially, politically, philosophically, around a single goal. To render the truth of the past irrelevant to the needs of the future. They called it the Purity Path, a program of engineered culture. Children were raised without historical context. Education was reformatted into abstract simulation, disconnected from lineage, origin, or consequence. Language drift was accelerated. Symbolic thinking discouraged. The archive was renamed. Not erased. Just folded inward, until it no longer pointed anywhere. History didn't die. It was disarmed. The SV Vengeance received the report from Sector Helion. 8 billion inhabitants. 0 recorded references to the cleansing. 0 knowledge of Earth. 0 memory of Corvallis. They had succeeded, not in suppressing rebellion, but in growing a generation immune to memory. Alara leaned over the console, face pale. They didn't kill the story. They built a world where it doesn't matter anymore. Roar stood behind her, silent. This is worse than silence, she added. This is a galaxy full of people who don't care what was lost. Roar spoke at last. Then it's time to show them what happens when the past stands up and walks into the room. Operation Lazarus began that night. Not as an invasion, as a resurrection. They returned to the dead zones, the burn scars of old Earth-aligned colonies. Midara Prime, Therion 6, Crestfall Station, each one shattered, uninhabitable. But they dug, and beneath the ash and ruins, they found what they were looking for. Testimony, encrypted messages, recordings, fragments of human resistance, voices screaming across time. They think killing us ends this. But we are not alive because we breathe. We are alive because we remember. These fragments became echo relays, miniature black box beacons seeded into purity path zones, disguised as environmental sensors, trade monitors, weather towers. And when they activated, they spoke. They told the truth in 1,000 formats. And no matter how fast the Empire tried to cut them down, people listened. Some only for a moment. Some denied. Some rebelled. Some wept. But the most dangerous thing happened quietly. They started asking questions. And for the purity path, that was unacceptable. Imperial Command authorized a countermeasure. Project Bloom, a civilization-scale simulation injected directly into education cores, VR interfaces, even dreams. Every citizen in the Bloom network was given a new history, one where Earth had never existed, one where the Empire had risen through unity and enlightenment, where all past violence had been defensive, where memory itself was now treated as a dangerous malfunction of outdated minds. And it worked, for a while, until the nightmares began. Across Bloom sectors, people started to dream in ruins. Cities they'd never seen. Bombs they'd never heard. Children began drawing a symbol no one taught them. Increment. They called it the sharp sun or the old shadow. They didn't know what it meant, but it burned in them. One teacher from Sector Eleuron wrote in her private log, "My students cry when we show them the founding films. They say something is missing, like they remember something that never happened, and somehow still feel responsible. The Empire doubled down. Neural editing, cognitive scrubbing, chemical alignment protocols. But none of it stopped the dreams. Because what they'd forgotten, what the Vengeance crew had counted on, was simple. You can kill a truth, but you can't unfeel it. Then came the broadcast, the largest pulse humanity had ever attempted. The SV Vengeance gathered its last reserves. Alara activated the deep core relay. Rur stood before the interface, and they launched it. A full immersion memory stream. Not data, not fact. Experience. Viewers didn't just hear the Corvallis massacre. They stood in the ash. They didn't just see the cleansing. They felt the heat as their skin turned to dust. And at the center of it all? Not propaganda. Just a single voice. Roars. Speaking not with rage. Not with vengeance. But with finality. We don't want you to suffer. We want you to know why we did. Because until you do, you can't ever choose not to do it again. The signal reached 87% of all galactic networks before the Empire shut it down. But by then, it didn't matter. It had seeded into people. In bloom sectors, children woke screaming. In quiet domes, elders finally wept. In control centers, engineers stared at old maps and couldn't explain why they remembered a planet called Earth. And in places the Empire thought long forgotten, people began carving the symbol into walls again. Not as resistance, not as rage, but as remembrance. The broadcast changed everything. Not because it reached everyone, but because it reached enough. Enough to make silence feel like complicity. Enough to make apathy crack. Enough to make the Empire afraid in a way it had never feared before. It wasn't rebellion. It was recognition. And that was far more dangerous. The High Council met in emergency quorum under classified signal. Only 2 agenda items. Suppress residual memory resonance. Eliminate the emotional substrates that allowed guilt to form. They called it the Cleanse Protocol. But it wasn't targeted at humans. It was aimed at their legacy, at empathy itself. Neurochemical drift programs were activated across the purity path. Compassion response centers in young brains were artificially dulled. Empathic receptors were suppressed in prenatal gene chains. Memory-related serotonin release? Reduced by 80%. The goal wasn't obedience. It was emotional flatlining. If the people of the Empire could no longer feel the past, they would no longer fear it or regret it. The first sign something had changed was the silence after the latest rebroadcast of the Corvallis stream. No riots. No protests. No messages of solidarity. No grief. Just nothing. Even in systems once moved to tears, the signal now fell into a void. As if the receivers were watching with glass eyes and iron hearts. Rur watched the numbers flatten. Engagement dropped. Resonance fell. And then came the first intercepted field report from a Bloom tier governor. Memory still present. Emotional response, 0. Resistance suppressed before it could begin. Alara stood on the bridge of SV Vengeance, fist clenched. They're not silencing people anymore. They're deadening them. They're trying to erase the very capacity to feel shame, Rur said. It's not memory suppression. It's empathy euthanasia. And that was when they knew. The Empire had gone beyond tyranny. It had become a machine designed to produce soulless continuity. And like every machine designed to run forever. It was time to jam the gears. Project Burnt Sky launched that week. A full-spectrum neural lattice virus. Developed not by engineers, but by artists. Built around irrationality, asymmetry, unresolved chord progressions, contradiction loops, emotional signatures that couldn't be predicted, mapped, or neutralized. It wasn't a weapon. It was a human feeling, condensed into code. And when released, it didn't attack minds. It reintroduced uncertainty. People laughed at strange things. They cried for reasons they couldn't explain. They looked at statues and felt something even if they didn't know what. It wasn't memory. It was meaning without structure. The very thing the Empire could not categorize. And therefore, could not control. Reports flooded in. Subjects stood silently for 7.2 minutes in front of blank wall. Refused to explain. Repeated the word real. Multiple children crying at tone frequencies between standard comm channel bleats. No pattern identified. A group of workers in Sector Grawl stopped their shift to chant a name. A name not in the Imperial Registry. When questioned, none could recall who started it. The Empire called it. Emotive Contagion Variant 7. Response Protocol. Failed. Suppression. Ineffective. Result. Reactivation of independent emotional cognition. Translation. They remembered how to feel again. And when they felt, they remembered. And when they remembered, they acted. Not with violence. With withdrawal. Sectors went dark. Not in rebellion. In refusal. Imperial commands were met with stillness. Orders vanished into the ether. Ships stopped responding. Planets went offline. The Empire didn't fall to war. It fell to numbness cracking open into awareness. But they weren't done yet. The High Council gathered one last time. They activated the final contingency, a black zone operation older than the purity path itself, older than the cleansing, older than the Empire. Its name was one word: Ashborn. Not a weapon. A protocol for planetary sterilization. 7 worlds flagged for immediate atmospheric collapse. 6 of them had shown increased resonance with Phoenix signals. The 7th? Earth. The world that birthed defiance. The cradle of contradiction. The origin of memory as weapon. The Empire was no longer trying to win. It was trying to end the species that wouldn't stop asking. What did we do? SV Vengeance intercepted the flag code mid-jump. The coordinates were clear. The schedule was active. The fleet was moving. Rur stood silent for a long time, then turned to Alara. Call the fleet. Her eyes narrowed. You mean? All of them. Within hours, lights blinked across fringe systems. Old ships. Hidden bases. Survivors who had disappeared into the dark. Phoenix cells that had never answered before. They answered now. The signal was simple. A single glyph. Increment. And below it. They're coming for Earth. And across the void, voices long silent replied. Then we're coming for them. The last time Earth had been surrounded by warships, it had burned. Not metaphorically. Literally. Atmosphere torn apart. Cities turned to glass. Oceans boiled. And now, a century later, it happened again. But this time, Earth wasn't silent. It listened. And the galaxy answered. The Ashborn fleet arrived at the edge of Sol in tight formation. Silent, massive, absolute. 37 dreadnoughts. 100 support cruisers. Planetary collapsers primed and humming. They didn't send warnings. They weren't here to talk. They were here to finish what had begun long ago. On Earth's surface, the skies flickered with orbital dust, all that remained of ancient satellites, long since replaced by passive memory relays. No defenses. No shields. No kinetic arrays. Just blue sky. And silence. Until the signal came. Increment. It pulsed once, then fractured. Across the system, hidden relays flickered open, not to fire, but to call. And what came wasn't a fleet. It was a convergence. Old ships. Fringe ships. Civilian haulers modified into warbeasts. Ancient constructs built from species once thought extinct. Vessels with no flags, only names etched in carbon, blood, and purpose. They didn't form ranks. They gathered like a storm. No command structure. No hierarchy. Just a single belief. Earth would not fall again. On board SV Vengeance, Rur stood before the activation board. Alara linked him to every vessel that had answered. He didn't give a speech. He told a story. We were buried once. Not because we were weak, but because we made them afraid of what we might become. And now we have. This isn't revenge. It's memory with teeth. Every ship lit its engines. The swarm surged. The Ashborn commanders hesitated. For a second. Long enough. Long enough to see the flagless fleet accelerate from multiple vectors, impossible to model, irrational in pattern, human in every terrifying way. And then, impact. The battle wasn't clean. It wasn't even a battle. It was a reckoning. The swarm didn't fight to win. It fought to interfere. To deny clean strikes. To pull dreadnoughts into planetary gravity wells. To burn reactors and suicide curves that took 2 ships at once. They didn't ask how many would die. They asked how many seconds they could buy. Seconds that Earth used to awaken something buried deep beneath Antarctic ice. Something old. Something Terran. Project Vindicator. A failsafe ship. Built at the end. Hidden before the cleansing. Launch now. Its hull wasn't new. It was angry. It rose from the ice not as a savior, but as a statement. Engines roared not with fuel, but with grief refined into propulsion. Its sole directive wasn't survival. It was broadcast. As it entered orbit, it opened every calm line in the system. Spoke to both sides. You came to erase us. But we were never written in your language. We were carved into stone. Into scars. Into songs sung in rooms without light. You can kill us. But you will remember our name when you sleep. And then it charged. The final moment wasn't nuclear. It was narrative. Because when Vindicator slammed into the central command ship of the Ashborn fleet, it didn't explode. It detonated a full memory burn. A last release. Every Earth archive. Every known record. Every name. Every sound. Every heartbreak. Every defiance. Unleashed. Transmitted. Injected into the psychic fabric of anyone connected to the Alliance's lattice. It wasn't a weapon. It was a flood. A storm of memory too large to ignore. And for a brief, terrifying moment. Every commander of the Ashborn fleet remembered being human. Not literally. Emotionally. They remembered guilt. They remembered hope. They remembered what they came to destroy and why they feared it. And then the fleet broke. Some turned and fled. Some surrendered. Some shut down. A few chose to burn with their convictions intact. But the Ashborn had died before the first shot fired. They just hadn't realized it yet. On Earth, people emerged from shelters. Not because they were ordered. Because they felt the silence, not fear, stillness. And in the sky above, ships of 1,000 shapes hung and did not fire, because the memory still burned, and it would not go out. Back on SV Vengeance, Alara slumped into a chair. She looked at Roar. They backed off. He nodded slowly. Not because we scared them. Why then? Because we reminded them of who they were, before they chose not to be. Somewhere in deep space, a ship belonging to No One recorded the final message from Vindicator. It added it to the archive and tagged it. Origin, Earth. Category, memory weapon. Status, deployed. Result, systemic collapse of intent to erase. Then quietly, the system updated Earth's classification. Humanity. Status, active. Threat level, variable. Cultural role, catalyst. Annotation. Not a species, a consequence. For the first time in centuries, the Imperial Council chambers stood empty. No mandates echoed through the holohalls. No declarations were etched into the spine of the archive. The fleets had withdrawn. The control systems remained intact. But the voice of the Empire had gone quiet, because no one wanted to be the first to speak after Earth had spoken so loudly. The Ashborn fleet was gone, not destroyed, disassembled. Some drifted, abandoned in deep space. Some were scavenged by fringe worlds desperate to survive. Some simply shut down, their crew unable to reconcile action with memory. Because now they remembered. And remembrance has no off switch. Across the stars, something strange began to happen. Silence. But not the silence of oppression. The silence of reckoning. Worlds that had once bowed before the Empire stopped answering pings. They weren't rebelling. They weren't arming themselves. They were listening to themselves for the first time in generations. And some began to speak again, not in code, not in filtered directives, but in truths. Ugly ones. Ancient ones. Forgotten names began to reappear in public squares. Increment symbols were scratched into railings, carved into walls, painted in flickers on city domes. Not as protest, as acknowledgement. Because it wasn't just Earth's truth that had been buried. It was theirs too. And Earth had simply been the first to bleed for it, and refused to stop bleeding until everyone else remembered what pain felt like. At Archive Node Theta 21, the Keeper AI sent a system-wide bulletin. A simple report. Entry recovery status. 14,397 prior erased events recovered. 42,000 plus corroborating testimonies reclassified as valid. Category created. Post-Oblivion testimony. Catalyst flag. Humanity Delta increment. Recommended note. Do not erase. It returned stronger. The Vex returned. Not as ships. As voices. Small nodes. Clean crystal structures. Non-hostile. They began appearing near worlds still under the influence of Empire censorship. Not interfering. Just being there. And when asked why, they replied. The Terrans gave us pain. Then taught us what to do with it. We are here to remind you too. The Empire called it psychological warfare. Others called it witnessing. And a few called it something else entirely. Atonement. The last chancellor of the Empire, a woman named Moreau Kin, distant descendant of one of the original war architects, issued a private order to her remaining advisors. We lost the war the moment we taught the galaxy that survival was more important than memory. And Earth made them remember why they started surviving in the first place. She stepped down. No one replaced her. The title dissolved like the silence that followed it. On SV Vengeance, the crew gathered in quiet reflection. The war was over, but not ended. Because some wars don't end with surrender or victory. They end when everyone stops pretending they weren't fighting one. Roar stood in the center hold, eyes on a single flag hanging from the ceiling, tattered, black, unmarked except for a faint increment stitched into the corner. Alara joined him. So she said, "What now?" He took a long breath. "We built all of this to prove we weren't gone. And now they know." He nodded. "But now comes the hard part." She raised an eyebrow. "Which is staying, not in power, in truth. Because it's easy to be heard when you bleed louder than your enemies. Harder still to whisper when the stars want you quiet again." Earth reopened its skies. Not with parades. With archives. New stations were constructed in orbit, not for war, but for stories. Other worlds sent their records. Not polished ones. Broken ones. Incomplete. Contradictory. Messy. Real. And the Terrans didn't ask for perfection. They asked for presence. And presence came. Because even those who still feared Earth understood now. Earth didn't survive to rule. It survived to remind. One last record arrived at the archive. A data pod from a forgotten system, once the site of one of the earliest purges. Inside, a message. The voice was aged, cracking. Human. One of the lost ones. They took our world. They buried our name. But they couldn't erase the fact that we were loved. And love leaves echoes. Thank you, Earth, for echoing us loud enough that we could find ourselves again. The archive updated its classification. Increment humanity. Status, persistent. Function, catalyst. Witness, fractured constant. Directive, preserve, connect, remind. Annotation. They do not conquer. They refuse to die. And so they change everything that touches them. There was no treaty, no official ceremony, no monument raised by the victors. Because there were no victors, only survivors. And memory. The archive drifted quietly above Earth, newly expanded and rebuilt not by bureaucrats, but by those who remembered what had been erased. It no longer glowed with sterile light. It pulsed with the color of grief reclaimed. Inside, there were no exhibits, only rooms. Rooms where stories could be told without interruption, without verdicts, without needing to prove who was right. On a windswept plateau somewhere in the northern hemisphere, Captain Roar stood alone. No armor, no insignia, just a man. His boots cracked the frost beneath him as he walked across what remained of the old battlefield, a place not recorded on any current map because it had been removed from memory long ago. Now, it was back, unlabeled, unclaimed, but real. A pair of children played nearby, dragging old metal scraps and turning them into shelters for imaginary people. One of them looked up. "Are you from the ship?" He paused. "Which one?" "The black one." With the voice. He smiled. "I was." The child thought a moment. "Did it hurt?" Roar looked out over the horizon. "It did." The child nodded. "Okay." And went back to building. In orbit, SV Vengeance was no longer a warship. It was a carrier of stories. It ferried diplomats, archive keepers, listeners, not to spread Earth's message, but to hear others. Its new directive was etched across the central panel of its bridge. Not to rule, not to fix, but to witness, to remember when others cannot. Alara commanded now. Roar had stepped down. He had done what he came to do. And it was time. A final transmission was prepared. A message to be sent across all known and unknown systems. It was not encrypted. It was not directed at anyone. It was simply set to broadcast forever, until someone, somewhere, heard it. A voice. Older now, but calm. "This is Earth. We are no longer lost. We are not righteous. We are not pure. We are simply here. And we remember. If you are broken, come. If you are silenced, speak. If you are forgotten, we will find you. We don't promise peace. We don't promise answers. But we will never again allow history to be burned just because it was inconvenient. Our scars are not your threat. They're your map. Let them guide you home." Years passed. Not all was good. Some tried to rise again with silence and steel. But now, there were too many witnesses. Too many who remembered. Too many who had lived in a world without memory and refused to return. One day, a signal reached Earth from outside the mapped galactic sectors. A single line. "We have stories. May we tell them?" The reply was automated. Yes. A port opened. And the archive grew again. Not with glory, but with echoes. In a quiet place, where Earth's skies were still clear, a stone had been placed. No names. Just one symbol, carved deep into the granite. Increment. And under it, faintly glowing, 5 words. Words that could belong to anyone. Words that now belong to everyone. "We are what survived remembering."